And in the Parliament House studio with me are politicians from both sides. Noongar man Ken Wyatt is the Indigenous Affairs Minister. He's from the Liberal government. Thank you for coming on Hack.
Pleasure to be with you. And
Gawa Yanyua woman Malarndirri McCarthy is a Labor Senator from the NT. Thank you as well.
Hey, AVANI, lovely to be here.
Ken Wyatt, I want to start with you. Only 2 of those targets are on track. The most that have ever been on track in the past 12 years is 3. Is this strategy failing young Indigenous people?
I think the way in which those targets were constructed were the right ambition. It was intended, and I know this was instigated by Tom Calma. Tom, with a group of Indigenous people, went to Kevin Rudd.
Division.
We have a division.
This is the beauty of doing live radio in the middle of Parliament House. Ken Wyatt, the Minister, has to unfortunately leave us because a division has been called. That means the bells have rung that he needs to actually run down the hall to the House of Representatives, and it is a massive shame that we didn't get more time with him. Hopefully he can come later on in the week to discuss some of this because there are some very important questions to him. But Malarndirri McCarthy, she's a senator, she's in the upper house, she doesn't need to run, she can stay with us.
Not yet.
Touch wood, you can stick with us for a bit. But, you know, this was a Labor government strategy. It started with your party.
That's
Do you acknowledge that this has not worked?
Oh, look, both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition spoke today, and it was quite clear, certainly Anthony Albanese pointed it out, that we as a Parliament are failing First Nations people. And that is correct, AVANI. And it deeply troubles me, not only as the Senator for the Northern Territory, but as a Yanyua Garoa woman. It concerns me that we're not reaching those targets.
Your government, when Labor was in government, Kevin Rudd was the Prime Minister. He started the Closing the Gap strategy 12 years ago. But it's only now in 2020 that there's a formal agreement with Indigenous people to refresh these targets. Why weren't Indigenous people involved from the beginning?
Well, Indigenous people were involved in terms of the beginning of this in relation to the apology to the Australian people in relation to First Nations people being taken away.
But not in a formal way.
I think what the government's doing now is certainly important in terms of having the peaks at the table. But that's not to say that it was not going to happen had Labor come into government. Let's remember, AVANI, that this government has been in power for 7 years, and we know that this could have been done a lot sooner. I think the first step was obviously ensuring that the Parliament had this day for First Nations people, which it didn't have prior to 12 years ago.
I'm keen to hear about Labor, though, because Labor was in government at the start of the Closing the Gap strategy 12 years ago and for many years after that. I mean, what went wrong in that period?
Well, let's remember what that period was like. We had a very hostile Parliament that was against even just the apology to stolen generations in this country.
Sure, but Labor was in power.
We were in power and we made that apology, but we had to do it within a circumstance and an environment of a Parliament that was completely obstructionist, which is really quite, when you reflect on that, you can see that's where we are now. We have a Parliament and a government who don't want to put in the Constitution.
I'm asking about the Labor Party, though,
people.
In those early years.
Sure.
What went wrong?
Well, nothing went wrong. It was just the beginning.
The Closing the Gap targets weren't on target.
No, we were in government for a couple of years. We put the Closing the Gap targets on the table, and we were able to reach out to First Nations organisations across the country. 5 years ago, $500 million was removed by Tony Abbott to Aboriginal organisations in this country.
Let's stay on the Labor Party, Malarndirri McCarthy. One aspect of this is where government funding is being spent, right, to help Indigenous people to improve their lives. How do you think that's going in the Northern Territory? A lot of federal funding is going to the Territory. There's a Labor...
it's actually being cut quite considerably.
There is a Labor NT government in the Territory, and there's criticism that they're not spending that money on Indigenous people. Do you agree?
Oh, look, I've certainly heard that criticism. I was certainly a minister in the Labor government in the Northern Territory for First Nations people, and having to try and fight for funding for the homelands across the Northern Territory, trying to fight for housing was enormously difficult under the Howard government regime.
Sure, but the funding that's there, that's being given to the Territory, is it being adequately spent on Indigenous people there, because the NT has the highest proportion of Aboriginal people in the country.
We've certainly got a high proportion in the Northern Territory, and there's certainly more that can be done in the Northern Territory, along with each of the other areas as well.
All right, NT Labor Senator Malarndirri McCarthy, you're being pulled away.
Wind up here,
Everyone's getting pulled in all directions. Okay. But we do appreciate you taking the time here.
I'd love to talk more with you on it, AVANI. I think it's great, the line of questioning that you're going on. That's awesome.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. It sheds a very important light on what's going here.
Thank you. Tune into the Senate now.